Good evening. My name is Melissa Musliner, and I am a member of the League of Women Voters, Wayzata, Plymouth area, and your moderator tonight for the Senate District 44 Candidate Forum. I would like to welcome our candidates and our viewers on behalf of our hosts, the League of Women Voters, Wayzata, Plymouth area. The League of Women Voters, a volunteer, nonpartisan political organization, encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League does not support or oppose any political party or candidate. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates, not those of the League of Women Voters. It is our purpose in sponsoring forums such as this to provide you with the opportunity to hear candidates discuss issues that are important to you. This evening's forum is provided to give you the opportunity to learn about the candidates running for Senate District 44. There is never enough time to cover all the issues in a setting such as this. If your questions were not addressed, feel free to contact the candidate directly. The rules for this evening's forum are as follows. Each candidate will be allowed a 2-minute opening statement. A 15-second warning signal will be given before the total time has elapsed. A question and answer period will be held following the opening statements. The answers will be confined to 1 minute unless designated by the moderator. Questions will be answered by the candidates in a rotating order. A 15-second warning will be given to the candidates, and then following the question and answer period, the candidates will be given 2 minutes for closing statements. Candidates, please finish your sentence quickly when you see the stop sign, or you will be interrupted. No reference of a personal nature will be tolerated. A person's public record may be examined, but not their character. This forum is made available to encourage the voting public to focus on the issues. Members of the public have been encouraged to submit questions online in advance. Questions that are unclear, hostile, or of a personal nature will not be used. Those that fall in the same general area may be consolidated. Recordings of this forum may not be used without the express written approval of the League. The League will only allow audio and video of this event to be broadcast in its entirety, except by the media reporting on the event. I also will request that you put yourself on mute when you are not speaking, so that it will automatically go to speaker view in our recording when you are answering a question. Thank you. The candidates for Senate District 44 are Greg Pulis and Johnson Stewart. And we will begin with Greg Pulis to give his introductory remarks. Greg?
Well, hi, I'm Greg Pulis. Thank you to the League. Thank you to Ann. A little bit about myself. I'm one of 8 kids. I grew up on the north side of Minneapolis. My father was an immigrant. My mother was a second-generation immigrant. My dad worked in a warehouse and we were poor. I worked from a very young age at a variety of jobs. I was a caddy, a dishwasher, a paper boy, you name it. And I'm proud to say that I paid my way through high school and college and law school. And after law school, I ended up at TCF, where I was for 25 years, the general counsel and vice chairman of the board. I met there my best friend, Bill Cooper, the CEO, and we developed a passion for education on the north side. We went over to Patrick Henry High School, then to Ascension School, and we had a passion for helping African-American kids get a fair shot at education. And that's a passion that's stayed with me for 30 years. My wife, Michelle, and I have lived in Plymouth for 28 years, 7 kids, 3 grandkids. I want to go to the legislature and I want to get something done. I want to identify common objectives in education, healthcare, and energy. I also want to use that experience at TCF. I balanced many a budget in my day, and I want to use that experience on that $4.7 billion budget deficit that we are facing. And I want to use the 30 years that I spent at Patrick Henry and Ascension on working on a statewide K through 3 comprehensive reading program that would ensure that every kid learns to read by the end of the 3rd grade. Now, you are not going to agree with me, I can assure you, on all of my positions, but if you elect me to the state legislature, I will work for the common good on common objectives. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Ann Johnson Stewart, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Greg. Nice to see you again. And thanks to the League for sponsoring this. My name is Ann Johnson Stewart. And of course, I'm running to represent my neighbors in Minnetonka, Plymouth, and Woodland in the state Senate. I'm a civil engineer and I own a small engineering firm that I started here in my house 25 years ago. I have grown it and I now employ 31 people. I have also been a teacher at several community colleges and I've taught at the University of Minnesota for the last 25 years. My husband, Jeff, and I moved into this house 25 years ago. We love our neighborhood and this community, and we hope to be here another 25. We raised our family here. All 4 of our kids went through Wayzata Public Schools, as did my husband, by the way, and our grandson started at Plymouth Creek a few weeks ago. I love being a civil engineer, and I am strangely passionate about pavements and roads. In 2018, the American Society of Civil Engineers rated our nation's infrastructure, and Minnesota, in fact, received a very low grade. That made me start to wonder who is advocating for our roads, bridges, and sewers at the Capitol. I found out there was no civil engineer in either the House or the Senate. And I firmly believe we need that kind of expertise in the legislature, especially given the state's duty to maintain and build our state's roads and water systems. It's very important. I actually started to think about running then, but really committed to run for Senate on the morning of August 4th of last summer. It was the day after 2 mass shootings that occurred in Dayton, Ohio and El Paso, Texas. I remember that next Sunday morning, sitting in my chair with tears running down my eyes. And I realized, looking at the victims of those murderers, that unless somebody like me stands up and do something about common sense gun reform, nothing will change. So I decided to run that day. In addition to gun violence, our state is facing many important issues. I am ready to get to work. I am so glad to have this opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you. And now I will start the questions, and you will have 1 minute for your answer. Communities around the state are counting on funding for critical projects currently proposed in the bonding bill that didn't pass in the last legislative session. Please discuss the impact of future delay. What will you do to work toward passage of important infrastructure projects? And the first speaker will be Ann Johnson Stewart.
All right, well, of course, bonding is a passion of mine because bonding is how we pay for many of our state's roads, bridges, water systems, buildings, and facilities. I am strongly in favor of passing a bonding bill because not only does it inject billions and $1.4 billion this year into every corner of the state through materials, per diem, resources, fuel, and wages, but it also helps us to maintain our infrastructure. So I am a very strong advocate of the bonding bill, and I actually would go so far as to say we need to be doing way more bonding around infrastructure. I wish that we would have passed a bonding bill. I will work very hard to make sure one's passed when I get there in February, but I hope that it's already been taken care of.
Thank you. And now Greg Pulis, please.
Well, our infrastructure is absolutely critical to the success of our economy. Where would we be if we didn't have this great highway system that we have in our state? So I am all in favor of taking care of our infrastructure. And I think we are rated a C, but we're rated D+ when it comes to our roads. The problem I have with the funding of infrastructure is that it's so inconsistent. I think we ought to have every year a bonding bill that is just for infrastructure. And then we should take care of it on a consistent basis. What happens now is that the infrastructure piece of it is combined with all sorts of other things, a Christmas tree of desires, and some of them make absolute sense, but I would separate those two out. What's in the second bonding bill can be the subject of individual discussion for each of these projects. So I am all for a bonding bill. We've been reasonable in the past, and we should continue to fund our infrastructure.
Thank you. And now question 2. What plans do you have to address educational funding? What specific legislative action can reduce educational disparities? And we will start now with Greg Pulis.
Well, our Constitution mandates that we adequately fund our public schools, and we've got terrific public schools in our district, and I would fulfill that constitutional mandate and see to it that our excellence of our schools is maintained. I have a problem with the way we fund education today. One, every year there's this big, huge battle over the per pupil funding. We got to stop that. We've got to collaborate and stop fighting. And the second problem I have is the complexity of the funding system. We have 13 separate additional categories in addition to that per pupil funding. Then we've got 13 different kinds of levies, and then we have these so-called equalizers. It is extremely difficult to discern how we are funding these schools. We've got to revise this system. We've got to come up with a transparent system, a consistent system that allows us to fund all of the needs of our public schools on a consistent basis going forward.
Thank you. And
Melissa?
Ann Johnson, yes.
Can you repeat the question? Because I think you had asked about the achievement gap too.
Certainly, I will ask. Yes, what plans do you have to address educational funding? What specific legislative action can reduce educational disparities?
Okay, thank you. So my parents were public school teachers. In fact, my grandparents were public school teachers, and most of my aunts and uncles were public school teachers, which is one of the reasons I chose to run. I really believe strongly that we need to fully fund our public schools. There's a few things that I believe at the state level we can do to address the achievement gap. Primarily, I think those things center around early childhood education, pre-K for every student, making sure that we fund English language programs and the teacher of color programs that have been proposed by the People of Color and Indigenous Caucus and which have not gone very far. I understand the challenges of the achievement gap because I see it as an instructor myself. And so I'm ready to be an advocate for public schools and look for ways that we can start to address that.
Thank you. And now question 3. How do you plan to address Minnesota's budget shortfall? Please discuss specific solutions. And we'll start with Ann Johnson Stewart.
So I think I'm unmuted. Yep. So this is a big problem. Of course, it's going to take a lot of serious work. The projected budget shortfall is over $6 billion, and it's going to take a lot of innovation to balance that. Governor Walz himself said you cannot tax your way out of a budget deficit that big, and we also cannot cut revenue or cut spending out of a budget that big, especially given that 70% of the state budget is on health and human services and education, which are things that I'm sure both Greg and I both highly value. There is a reserve fund that's $2.5 billion. We already talked about the bonding bill. I think one way that we can address the budget shortfall is by putting people back to work. Frankly, putting 4,000 people back to work doing building and facility construction is one way to see an influx of money through payroll, taxes, and other spending. And that's one way that I would address the budget shortfall. If I have any more time, I just need to, okay.
Sorry. And Greg Pulis, please.
Well, our state constitution mandates that we have a balanced budget, so we cannot borrow our way out of this. And we can't bond our way out of this either. So we have two choices. We can increase taxes or we can cut expenses. And I don't want to increase taxes. I'm glad the governor doesn't want to do that either. When we talk about taxing in a recession, that would crush any recovery. And we're already the 5th highest tax state in the union. On the expense side, over the last 10 years, we've increased our spending by over 15%, and that's inflation adjusted. And we've increased the number of state employees by 19%. And our population has only increased by 6.5%. So in my mind, we've got to go to work on that budget side. There is the possibility of additional federal funding, but we can't continue to expect Hail Mary passes from the federal government. We've got to mind our own business, and I would go to work on the expense side first.
Thank you. Next question. The Police Accountability and Reform Act that was passed earlier this year received bipartisan support. What next steps would you prioritize, if any? And we'll start with Greg Pulis.
Well, I like 3 of the things that were in that reform package. I like the statewide use of force policy. I like the requirement that the chiefs have to report misconduct. I like the requirement that there's additional training to identify mental health issues. But before we go off and talk about new reforms, we have to stop talking about defunding these police, and we have to stop talking about reallocating funds to other areas. The police need to know that their budgets are intact. When we look at reforms, additional reforms, we should know what we already have in place. So in Plymouth and Minnetonka, we've already adopted 21st century policing. We already have 25 police officers in Plymouth who are trained in crisis intervention, 4 experts in crisis intervention, and we have a 2-year program with Hennepin County for social services. So I'm for additional sensible reforms, but I do not favor defunding our police.
Thank you. And Johnson Stewart.
So I too am not in favor of defunding the police. I think having a strong police force is an important part of civilized society. I certainly have enjoyed the benefits of a strong police force in Minnetonka and in Plymouth, and I'm glad to have that. I think the bill that was passed in the August special session contains some important policing reforms. By the way, they were proposed. There was several others that were proposed by the Posse Caucus, which again is the people of color and indigenous people, or Indigenous Caucus. And I would look for an opportunity in the next session to further adopt some of those recommendations. I think it's difficult for people who have not experienced the racial injustice that some of our citizens have to advocate for policing changes when we're just not experiencing it. So I will follow the lead of the Posse Caucus to enact some of the other changes that they feel are warranted.
Thank you. The next question. Small businesses have been greatly affected by the pandemic. What plans do you suggest to address the economic impact on small businesses due to the pandemic?
Mm-hmm.
And we'll start with Ann Johnson Stewart.
So, of course, I have been especially impacted by COVID, or specifically impacted by COVID, because I run a small business. So I have 31 employees, and we were absolutely thrilled and relieved to receive a PPP loan. It was fantastic. We got it at like 3 hours before payroll was due. So I personally have experienced the angst of small business, the stress of making a payroll and making sure that my employees' insurance is paid, making sure that I take care of my staff. And we are going to look to further aid from the federal government specifically. Right now, if I didn't have that PPP loan, my company would not be solvent. I would have had to lay off quite a few people. We have made it through this crisis without laying off a single staff person, and I would look to replicate those kinds of relief programs moving forward.
Thank you. Greg Pulis.
Well, our Constitution, again, prohibits us from borrowing money. We have to have a balanced budget. So the ability of our state to provide funding for these businesses is just not there. These people are victims of COVID just as much as the people who have been physically harmed from COVID. What I would do is establish a clearinghouse within the Department of Employment and Economic Development that would gather up all the information out there on SBA programs, a lot of SBA programs. There's the Fed Main Street program. There are programs with the IRS. And I would then, in this clearinghouse, be this a one-stop shopping place for business who have been adversely impacted by COVID. I would also look to get additional PPP funding. That program was suspended, but I think we should lean on our federal counterparts and get that PPP back going. I think the state also needs to take a lead in coaching these people. What do you do next? We should help these people.
Thank you. Question 6. What actions, if any, should the legislature take to address concerns about racial justice and equity? Greg Pulis, please.
Well, I think the state needs to take action to always promote racial justice in our state. For me, the biggest category of racial injustice in our state are the educational outcomes that we permit for African American students in our schools. If you look at our third grade, only 30% of African Americans are reading proficiently in the third grade versus 65% of whites. Guess what? That translates into all kinds of consequences: job loss, job opportunity loss. So in the Twin Cities, average Black income, 39,000, average white income, 83,000. 1 in 4 Blacks own a home, 3 in 4 whites. That's not right. We can remedy that with a statewide K-3 reading program that guarantees that every kid learns how to read by the end of the third grade, regardless of their race. That would go a long way toward racial equity in Minnesota.
Thank you. And Johnson Stewart.
So I do believe that systemic racism exists in Minnesota. I think it is deeply rooted and it's prevalent. One of the challenges is that we just can't mandate good behavior, and we cannot mandate core values that don't believe one race is superior to another. So this is a challenge. I think education is extremely important. Of course, I come from a long line of former educators, and I think this is a critical piece of the puzzle. But in addition to addressing the achievement gap, I think we also need to address the opportunity gap. And we need to make sure that all schools are fully funded, whether they're in the urban or the rural districts. I think we need to own the fact that in Minnesota, this racism and the achievement gap, it doesn't just exist in the city, it is prevalent throughout. I would also work to fund workforce development. I've personally been involved in that for the construction trades. I think it's important to put people to work and give them opportunities so that they can start to have a better future.
Thank you. And our next question: what is your energy policy? What place do renewable energy sources have in Minnesota? And we will start with Ann Johnson Stewart, excuse me.
So my first degree is actually in environmental engineering, and at the University of Minnesota, I managed an enormous solar energy project that combined the efforts of our students in engineering, architecture, construction, and a bunch of other things. So I know intimately what we're working on around renewable energy here in Minnesota, and specifically at the university. I think that the state has a significant role in making sure that businesses who supply solar energy panels and wind turbine blades continue to prosper in Minnesota, that the materials are readily available and affordable for homeowners. I think there's ways that we can incentivize more electric vehicles by making Minnesota a clean car state. We can make sure that our roads have charging stations, and we can fund research so that things like batteries and renewable storage become easier, cheaper, and more readily available. So.
Thank you. Greg Pulis.
Well, we all want to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. The problem with solar and wind is the sun only shines about 20% of the time and the wind only blows about 35% of the time. So it's intermittent. And so you need something else to back up the solar and the wind. And currently we're talking about coal and natural gas. Guess what? They have carbon in them. Our state currently has a state ban on any new nuclear plants. That's a mistake. Nuclear is clean, it's efficient, and it's carbon free. We should end that state ban, which the governor supports, and I think Ann supports. Oddly enough, the Democratic National Committee now supports nuclear, but we got to end that state ban. Nuclear will last 100 years. It's clean and it's safe. We should end the ban and let it compete.
Thank you. Next question. Do you think improvements are needed in our healthcare system? If so, what specific ideas do you have to improve healthcare for Minnesotans? And we'll start with Greg Pulis.
Well, our health is important to us. The health of our families, extremely important. If you're going to get sick, the best place in the world to get sick is Minnesota. We have terrific health care in Minnesota and we need to preserve it. Now we do need to make it more affordable. Now Ann has in mind, we're going to get rid of our employer health care plans. Well, guess what? 70% of the people in this district have an employer health plan. And I guarantee if we get rid of those plans, no matter what anybody says down the line, the government will tell us what the health care is and they'll tell us what our choices are. So I'm not in favor of getting rid of employer health plans. We do need to bring the cost down. The primary thing I think we can do is mandate full disclosure of prices. A colonoscopy could cost $400. It could cost $1,600 somewhere else. We've got to have complete disclosure in comparison with Medicare. There are things we can do. Let's not turn our system over to the government.
Thank you. Ann Johnson Stewart.
So yes, I do think there are problems in our healthcare system when the CEO of United Healthcare makes $52 million in 1 year, and the same healthcare company rejects my claim for a $2,700 sleep study for my daughter. So yes, I think there is a problem with healthcare in Minnesota. There's definitely enough money to go around, and I will be happy to look for it. Now, I provide insurance for my employees. I do not provide health care. I am not a doctor, so I could not provide health care for my employees, but I voluntarily choose to provide insurance for them. So respectfully, I have to disagree. I don't think that health care should be taken away from people. I think insurance should be provided to people that is more affordable for all of us. I am a civil engineer. I have no business choosing the insurance for my employees, even though frankly, I'm glad to do it because I think it's a basic human right, but I have nothing to say about providing health care for them.
Thank you. The economic impact of COVID-19 is likely to have a greater impact on housing instability and homelessness, especially as the weather turns colder. What can the legislature do to address these issues? And we'll start with Ann Johnson Stewart.
So we have an upcoming forum with Beacon Interfaith Housing on October 8th. I would hope that if you're interested in affordable housing, you tune into that. There actually is quite a bit of housing covered in the bonding bill. It is a real problem in Minnesota in some of the areas. And we just saw an article in the Star Tribune about Duluth now having a rush on housing. Housing is becoming unaffordable for many people in the urban areas. And I think if we are responsible employers and business people, we have to consider where our workers are going to live. So I think this is something that we can look into as a state government to find ways to make workforce housing available throughout the state so that people are actually able to work and live in the same city. We don't currently have a lot of opportunities for that out in Wayzata, Plymouth, and Minnetonka and Woodland, and so I will work for that.
Thank you. Greg Pulis?
Well, for sure, we have an obligation to make sure everyone has a roof over their head. Every family is entitled to a safe home. And so affordable housing is absolutely our obligation. The problem I have is that the more the government's been involved in affordable housing, the less affordable it's become and the less of it we have. I think we need to look at our state codes. We've got a 700-page state code, and that's adding to our costs. We also have all these fees that cities are now charging in connection with construction. And finally, we've got the Met Council, which has drawn a circle around the Twin Cities, and that results in you can't build outside of the circle. Well, that drives the cost of land inside the circle sky high. And so we need to look at the cost of what it costs to construct homes. And before we proceed on affordable housing, additional dollars, we need to figure out what the current problem is, why our cost of construction is so high. Affordable housing, yes.
Thank you. This will be our last question. Is there an issue that wasn't discussed in this forum that you would like to address? And we'll start with Greg Pulis.
Well, the issue I'd like to discuss is systemic racism in our police force. That term is getting tossed around with impunity, and I think it should stop. Wherever we find racial discrimination, we've got to stamp it out. But it's wrong to call our police systemically racist. It just is. There is a rotten apple in every barrel, and you've got to identify that and uproot it. But 99.9% of our police officers are good and decent people. They are doing a terrific job under very difficult circumstances, and it greatly affects their morale to be accused of systemic racism all the time. They are not. We need to support our police. We need to stop talking about defunding them, reallocating funds, stand behind our police so that we can have safe communities.
Thank you. And Johnson Stewart?
So I was going to talk about the boundary waters because I'm an environmental engineer, and I feel that one of the roles I will play in the legislature is making sure that our watersheds are safe. But I must talk now about systemic racism because I just need to mention that as a civil engineer, I hold a license. I'm guessing that Greg Pulis holds a license too as a lawyer. My license requires that I behave ethically and I uphold my profession. My license means that I report to my clients, the public, and the people who are frankly going to be using my services, whether it be a road or a bridge, etc. As an engineer, I have a duty to maintain the ethics and behavior of my entire profession. This is true for many professions, and I believe that we should have police have the same accountability. Whether you're an engineer, a lawyer, a hairstylist, a beautician, whatever the case may be, I think we owe it to our profession to maintain ethical standards. Melissa, you're muted.
Thank you. I had stopped us a little early because we started a little early, but they're asking if I can just ask another question. So I'll go ahead and throw this out there for you. What is your position on the legalization of the recreational use of marijuana? And we'll start with Ann Johnson Stewart.
So this grandma engineer is in favor of legalizing marijuana. We've seen this happen already in 10 states in the country. I think, frankly, it's inevitable. Of course, I don't want anybody misusing marijuana, and I want to make sure that if we do legalize it in Minnesota, we have the same kinds of age and abuse restrictions as we see with alcohol and other substances. I think that legalizing marijuana can have some significant impacts on our budget. We have seen, I have friends who are engineers in Illinois. Much of the tax and sales revenue from marijuana in Illinois is going to public infrastructure. And frankly, my friends who are engineers there can't spend all the money they have. So I think we need to look seriously at this issue. We need to make sure that we're responsible and we put restrictions around the use. And I look forward to investigating it as a senator.
Thank you. And Greg Pulis?
Well, do you want your kids smoking marijuana? I don't want my kids smoking marijuana. And Colorado only recently has legalized this marijuana. So to me, we ought to step back and let this experiment play out and see what happens. I think marijuana can be addictive. Up to 30% of the people, I think, get addicted to it. When you legalize marijuana, you increase the use by teenagers by 25%. Let's see what happens in Colorado with mental health, long-term, short-term. Let's see what happens to crime. Let's see what happens to employment. Let's see if it is addictive. Let's see if it is a great gateway drug. Let's not leap into this. Let's watch this experiment play out. When you legalize marijuana, you're telling our kids it's okay to smoke it. I'm not okay if more kids smoke marijuana because we've legalized marijuana. Not okay by me.
Thank you. And now I will ask for your 2-minute closing statements. And we'll start with Greg Pulis.
Well, thank you for watching tonight. I think that you can see that Ann and I have some fundamental differences on the major issues. On the police, I'm 100% behind our police. I am not for, as Ann wants to do, reallocate funds away from police budgets. Guess what? 90% of the police budget are police officers. So if you reallocate funds, guess what? You're going to have fewer police. Not a good idea for the safety of our community. Taxes. Ann wants to increase your taxes. I don't. Ann wants to increase that gas tax by 70%. I guarantee if the Democrats take control of the Senate, they will increase your income taxes. When it comes to healthcare, Ann wants to terminate your employer health plan. I don't want to do that. And I don't care. I know Ann says it's not going to happen, but down the line, they take control of that. They will tell you what the terms of your health care are. When it comes to mining and Line 3, we haven't talked about that, but the governor and Ann are opposed to mining and Line 3. Mining can produce for us $500 million a year in additional revenues and royalties, and can be done safely. There isn't going to be any lake of sulfur up there. The mines aren't even in the boundary water canoe area. And so we should proceed with mining. Line 3 is the lifeblood. All the crude oil from Canada comes down through that pipeline. It's 60 years old, it's got to be replaced. That too can be done in an environmentally safe way. I want to bring the 25 years of experience I have balancing budgets at TCF to bear on that state budget deficit without increasing your taxes. And I want to use the 30 years I have in education for African-American kids on the north side to achieve racial equity in education through a statewide K-3 reading program. Every kid reads by the end of the 3rd grade. Follow me on Greg Pulis for Minnesota Senate and vote for me. Thank you.
Thank you. And now your final remarks, please, Ann Johnson Stewart.
All right. Well, thanks again. It was really fun to be here tonight, and I'm glad it's over, frankly. This is an important moment in Minnesota, and we need serious legislators who have the experience and compassion to work hard to address our issues. I think that I have shown with my experience as both a committed teacher and engineer and business owner that I have kind of a unique group of expertise that we don't see anywhere else, and I look forward to bringing that to share with my colleagues. As I said earlier, we'll be facing some significant challenges in next year's session. We will have a very large deficit and a budget to balance. Well, I've balanced a budget too. I own a company. Granted, it's not quite as large as TCF, but we do our best, and I have been happy to be profitable every year. We've got to also figure out how to recover from COVID, get Minnesotans back to work, support our local businesses, fully fund our schools, and also address the threats of climate change. We didn't even talk about that really tonight, but it is real. As an engineer, I will tell you, our culverts and our roads are being washed out in Minnesota as we speak this month because of climate change. We need an engineer in the Senate who can talk about science and trusted figures and bring that expertise to our lawmaking. My experience has prepared me to be a strong, responsive leader in this community. As a business owner, I know that being reactionary is not a plan. We have complex problems that need complex solutions. And again, I am an engineer. I trust science. I have gathered data. I know what's happening with our infrastructure and what we need to do to fix it. So we have a big opportunity this year, both in this district and the state. And we have a chance to really choose what our government is going to look like and what core values we're going to focus on. I will work hard for you, and I look forward to your vote. Thanks.
Thank you. And this concludes the Senate District 44 Candidate Forum. Thank you to the candidates, the League of Women Voters volunteers, and those viewing the event on cable and video for your participation in this candidate forum. Thank you to the City of Plymouth for supporting the event and to CCX Media for recording tonight's forum. On-demand viewing can be accessed at ccxmedia.org, as well as the League of Women Voters Wayzata Plymouth Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, and at our website, www.lwvwpa.org. Please remember to vote in the November 3rd general election by absentee ballot or in person. Your vote is your voice. The League of Women Voters welcomes new members, both men and women, at www.lwvwpa.org. Thank you and good night.